Hello, everyone, and welcome to Shift's Health Hour. We're so glad you're here for today's live discussion on the future of aging. We'll begin with a 45-minute discussion led by Dr. Brian Hollett, and then we'll open it up for a live Q&A. You can submit your questions anonymously in the Q&A forum at any time, so feel free to share them throughout the session. Before we get started, a quick reminder that the information presented today is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Nothing in this presentation is intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Please consult a qualified healthcare professional regarding any medical conditions or treatment. Dr. Hollett, I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful, thanks. Well, it's my joy and privilege to be able to chat with all of you today about a topic that can be a bit technical, but will also make it very practical as we progress through this presentation today. The topic of the future of aging, talking about topics from lifespan to healthspan. So first, a quick background on myself. I went to undergraduate out at Wheaton College here in Chicagoland, went back to the Metro Detroit area where I had grown up for medical school at Wayne State University, then returned back to Chicagoland at Resurrection Medical Center for my residency, where I was also the chief resident. And then during the COVID time, as COVID-related medical care got fairly one-dimensional, I decided to go back to school and do an MBA during that time to continue to better understand the business of medicine. And from a clinical side of things, beyond my board certifications in family medicine, I'm also board certified with the American Board of Lifestyle Medicine as well, really focusing in on putting the lifestyle behaviors that we can approach to work to improve our health. So when we think about first and foremost, setting the stage, the topic of longevity. The United States now has more than 120,000 centenarians. That number is supposed to increase by a factor of 5, up to 600,000 centenarians by 2060. We are living longer in this forecast than any generation in human history. But the real question is, will these lives be better? So, as we think about this progression towards thinking about living longer lives, right now we're in the middle of what's being called the longevity gold rush. It is now its own market category. Was reading articles yesterday about the increased spend in this domain. And as happens in all domains, when there is a highlight of increased attention to a domain, there can be both very virtuous players and then there can be opportunistic entrants into a field. So this topic of luxury longevity clinics, there are both extremely high quality entrants in this field, and then there are also those selling unproven interventions at high financial cost for potential biological gain, but guaranteeing of their own financial gain. There are billions being invested into longevity science and research, and there's a continued deepening of experimental interventions to look at from cellular all the way up to the organismal level, ways to intervene in this aging process. So much of this presentation will be spent talking about aging as a topic and shedding light on how much of this science is true science versus hype. So as we continue along, setting the shared vocabulary of the terms lifespan and health span, a term that many are accustomed to and familiar with, but I'll do the quick refresher. Lifespan is the number of years in life. Health span is the amount of life in those years. The challenge as we think about our existence as human beings is while we would all like to live a long life, there's typically the assumption that that long life would be filled with rich, capable years. Um, and as we are living longer, the true reality, unfortunately, is that the average human being alive today is living longer with chronic disease, notably often at lower levels of health capacity than they would desire to be. So really wanting to optimize not just the length of life, but also the capacity that is had with health span throughout life. As we think even more deeply about just the topic of aging, aging classically is viewed as the number one non-modifiable risk factor for disease. Aging is the single most implicated factor in increasing rates of heart disease or cancer or Alzheimer's disease or metabolic disease. And from a financial analysis, if we could even slow the aging process by 1 year, it would generate trillions in economic value. The historical approach of medicine has been one focused on treating problems once they emerge, but the future-facing question that's being asked is, might it be possible to target aging itself, and then as a result, reduce the downstream disease occurrences that are noted? So as we continue along thinking about the topic of aging, um, it's complex. I'm going to break down the 12 components in this infographic. Um, but as our current thinking exists at the moment, and it's ever evolving, there are 12 hallmarks of aging. These were identified in a landmark paper in 2023 that outlined these fundamental molecular and cellular processes that drive aging. They're organized into three tiers. There's primary hallmarks. These are the causes of damage. There's antagonistic hallmarks. These are the responses to the damage. And then there's the integrative hallmarks. These are the culprits of the phenotypic, the end stage aging process that we see. So I'll start up in the 1201 position, and I'll slowly work my way clockwise through it. So when we think about genomic instability, if we think about our human genome as a library, essentially what happens is the DNA library eventually has no librarian. Over a lifetime, all these exogenous insults that we receive, whether it's radiation, toxins, internal errors like replication mistakes, free radicals, accumulation of other mutations, other changes that happen, even all the way down to our blood cells, these changes are a major driver of the aging process and are even directly implicated and recognized as major drivers of plaque formation inside of blood vessels and cardiovascular disease risk, independent of other traditional risk factors, showing that when a genome's repair crew can't keep up, there's high risk for the library in this analogy to burn. Next up is the telomeric attrition side of things. Telomeres are the biological countdown clock. Think of them, they're repetitive DNA caps on the end of chromosomes. They shorten with each cell division, and when they reach a certain short length, the cell enters senescence or apoptosis. This age-dependent telomere shortening predicts all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality. And think about this as telomeres like the plastic tips on the end of shoelaces. Um, Once they wear away and then that shoelace begins to fray, everything begins to unravel. Next, there are epigenetic alterations. Um, when we think about epigenetics, this is that preset positioning that our genes are placed in. I describe it as the preset switches in a circuit board that are set in a certain array. As we age, there can be DNA methylation drift, histone modification, changes in chromatin that creates remodeling. And in fact, these are very predictable based on chronological age, such that they form the basis of many epigenetic clocks. By Steve Horvath, Hannum, and amongst many others. And these can be very helpful at creating a speedometer for the aging process itself. But in general, for the epigenetic alterations, the genome itself does not change, just the instructions for reading it, those presets. Next, one of the other primary hallmarks is the loss of proteostasis. This is when protein folding and the protein folding pattern breaks down. Cells depend on chaperone molecules to help to guide them in their proper and to maintain proper fold, function, and capacity within the body. And as we age, the quality control machinery in protein folding often falters, leading to accumulation of misfolded and aggregated proteins. Examples in modern medicine include in Alzheimer's disease, this is the buildup of amyloid, beta amyloid proteins or tau proteins. In Parkinson's, this is the buildup of alpha-synuclein, as well as many other examples in neurodegenerative disease. The phrase here is that garbage in, garbage stays. Next up, we have disabled macroautophagy. This is when the recycling plant shuts down. This was elevated from a subcomponent to its own standalone hallmark in 2023. Um, Macroautophagy is the cell's primary system for degrading and recycling damaged organelles and proteins. And when it fails, cellular debris accumulates, it fuels inflammation, dysfunction, and interestingly, caloric moderation and exercise most potently upregulate this autophagy. Um, One of the reasons why, as we'll get later on, why these two elements are some of the most robust anti-aging interventions known. Next, as we get to these antagonistic hallmarks, the double-edged swords, there can be a deregulation in nutrient sensing, essentially saying that our thermostat is stuck on feast. So the signaling molecules, the signaling pathways that exist inside of our body for insulin, IGF-1, mTOR, AMPK, and sirtuin pathways, they've essentially evolved to match cellular growth with nutrient availability. And with age and also chronic overnutrition in our modern era, these pathways become essentially tonically activated towards growth and away from repair. Um, Mitochondrial dysfunction comes next, thinking of the power grid going down. Mitochondria are the cell's energy plants, and with age, these mitochondrial powerhouses accumulate DNA mutations that notably limit their ability to do work. And this can be a vicious cycle that as mitochondrial capacity decreases, this can radically increase the likelihood of other frailty-related things, such as loss of lean muscle mass, creating sarcopenia, fatigue, and frailty. And of those above the age of 70, up to a third, if we're able to sequence their mitochondrial DNA, carry some pathogenic mutations that have resulted over time that result in poorer mitochondrial function and correlate with slower cognition, stiffer arteries, and higher rates of dementia. Next, we have cellular senescence, triggered by DNA damage and telomeric shortening and other forms of stress. Sometimes senescent cells, as we age, they permanently exit the cell cycle but remain metabolically active. They are not degraded and broken down. These cells then secrete a toxic cocktail of pro-inflammatory molecules like cytokines and chemokines and proteases, and these, what's called SASP, senescence-associated secretory phenotype. This SASP spreads senescence to neighboring cells through this hormonal release by these aging cells. This drives chronic tissue inflammation that then pollutes those nearby cells as well and limits their ability for optimal function. Next up, we have in the integrative side of things, uh, stem cell exhaustion. So if we think about stem cells as the repair crew, um, tissue regeneration depends on resident stem cell populations. And with age, stem cells decline in their number and function due to these accumulated genomic elements of damage, epigenetic drift, telomeric shortening. And as a result, we see impaired function. We see impaired wound healing. We see aging of our immune system. We see decreases in lean muscle. We see reduced organ reserve. And then we start to see the emergence of this clinical phenotype, visual state that is frailty. Next, we get towards the altered intracellular communication. As I describe it, things get lost in translation. As we age, this aging can threaten to disrupt the normal signaling networks that are present between cells, whether that is endocrine, neuroendocrine, or paracrine. This signaling becomes dysregulated, and as this, the net effect of this is there's a loss of coordinated tissue response to stress, which contributes further to organ decline and also blunts the physiologic reserve that we then typically observe as a result in older individuals. Next, we have the topic of chronic inflammation, this idea of a fire that never goes out. This can also be referred to as inflammatory aging. This was also elevated to its own standalone hallmark in 2023. Chronic low-grade sterile inflammation is driven by this SASP process, senescence-associated secretory phenotypes. It relates to gut permeability, it relates to the increase of cellular debris, changes in our own blood cell creation, and results in measurable increases in inflammatory markers like C-reactive peptide, interleukin 6, TNF alpha, and several others. And this inflammaging process is, connected to nearly all other hallmarks of clinical disease and aging. Um, and it's both a consequence and an accelerator of aging. Last, we have the topic of dysbiosis of these 12 hallmarks. This is in essence the concept of when your gut bugs go rogue. Also newly elevated in 2023, the age-related shifts in our gut microbiome composition, which are all of the microbes essentially from our mouth out to the other end inside of this large tube structure. That starts in our mouth and ends at the rectum. There is a loss in biodiversity, expansion of pro-inflammatory microbes, and also increased intestinal permeability that fuels system-wide inflammation and metabolic dysfunction. The gut immune brain axis, which is a growing topic of both research and practice in medicine, looking into the broader topic of disorders of the gut brain axis. Connects that microbial imbalance doesn't stay local. It drives processes throughout the body, such as via inflammaging, altered nutrient sensing, and also even having increased likelihood that it may be accelerating neurodegeneration. So the big picture, pulling this all together, all of these 12 hallmarks are interconnected. Small changes in one cascade through the others can potentiate continued progression. They're organized hierarchically, with the primary hallmarks initiating the damage, the antagonistic hallmarks representing initially protective responses that become deleterious over time, and the integrative hallmarks produce the clinical phenotype of aging. Critically, each one of these hallmarks meets three criteria. It manifests with age, its experimental accentuation accelerates aging, and three, therapeutic interventions targeting it can decelerate or reverse aging. So each of these is both its own problem and a target for interventions. So as we continue along and we think about this topic of aging, the immediate next question is really to ask, how much control do I have? We now know that genetics only play a small role in the topic of longevity and health span. Certainly, a very large beneficial factor you could have would be to have a long and illustrious history of centenarians in your family tree. But even in absence of that, lifestyle, the things that we are consuming, how we're moving, how we are recovering, and maintaining both, I say, metabolic health and social health radically impact and play a huge role, more than 80% of an impact on determining these elements of our health span and lifespan. So our aging trajectory remains highly modifiable. As we continue to progress along, one helpful descriptor that can at times be used is this differentiator between biological age, the number of years that our cells appear to have aged, versus chronological age, our calendar age. So yes, chronological age measures those years that we've lived, whereas biological age measures how rapidly the body is aging. This is a topic that represents a much broader phase that we're in the longevity sector right now of working to scientifically agree upon as a whole field what are the metrics around which we will define evidence-based longevity medicine. There needs to be agreement upon biological clocks. If we are going to use an epigenetic or proteomic-based epigenetic biological clock, everybody needs to be using the same instrument. Until there is that unification, there will be differences based on which set of biomarkers are being used, resulting in some interventions being claimed to be pro-longevity, and those same interventions, if analyzed by a different metric set, might be viewed as not potentiating longevity. So the positives, we are getting significant improvement in this domain, but we're at the phase where there is still the lack of fully defined metrics that will be accepted by the field as a whole. As we think about the topic of aging, it's also important to acknowledge organs age at different rates. Some of the newer epigenetic clocks are trying to dive more deeply into measuring organ aging itself, with the hope that if we can find a specific organ that is aging faster than others in a relative sense, we can better calibrate our efforts as human beings that have multiple competing priorities for each hour of our day to be able to focus on what approaches would be most mandated. And that if somebody was acknowledging that they had a notably increased pace of aging in their liver, they would then immediately and much more aggressively acknowledge they would likely need to make changes in their lifestyle behaviors to make sure that they were not doing things that were making life harder for the liver. And in fact, doing things to try to make that liver be able to catch up in the biological aging side of things. So yes, as we have brain aging, we see changes in mood, changes in sleep. As the heart ages, certainly we see dysfunction that can increase. The immune system sees, increased susceptibility to infections. The lungs age. We talked about the liver. Kidneys will slow down as they are aging. Certainly, the musculoskeletal system sees decrease in mass and decrease in function. And then even our own blood cell creation. We see changes in those coagulation factors inside of our blood that help us to have proper clotting. Platelets stick together more. And then there's also a slight decrease in the overall creation of blood cells themselves. So really starting to pay deeper attention to this topic of rather than aging at the organismal level, being able to also look at it over time more at the organ-based level. Now, this organ-based aging is a leading edge topic that is actively being expanded upon right now. While there are some epigenetic clocks that do look at these organ-based ages, we're still in the process of now reassessing based on those organ-based clocks. Can we then extrapolate that out in real world populations to not just see that a cohort of people who had a certain problem had specific age of organs, but then show that if we focus in on that topic, we're able to create improvement that matches up with observed event rate. So it's bridging the epigenetic and longevity side of research with the more traditional medical biological research arm of things. So as we think about the topic of aging as a whole, the top theme that I want to impress upon all of you is that lifestyle has an enormous impact. The key tenets, exercise, moderation in alcohol, maintaining ideal body composition, avoiding smoking, having good restorative sleep, and have a protein forward, fiber rich diet continue to be the biggest hallmarks for continuing to add multiple years of life expectancy, and all are fully independent to genetics. With a specific focus, exercise is the most proven intervention. If someone were going to pick a single intervention to have to pick to enhance their longevity and say they would be average in the others, exercise would be the one to be consistently very good in. Exercise reduces inflammation, improves mitochondrial function, improves metabolic health, and strengthens our cardiovascular resilience. And the goal as we think about exercise is the concept of, becoming and maintaining a level of cardiovascular and metabolic fitness. Health is a marathon and not a sprint. So when we think about the topic of exercise, this is not the quick 90-day get into shape, or the quick race-centric prep where someone is spending a lot of time in a specific cardio modality to get ready for an event. While that can be a component that helps to motivate, the real goal is building out a pattern of lifelong exercise, because they're just like investing, where people aspire for compound interest on top of their initial investments. The same is true on the health side of things. If we make these wise investments of time in our health, particularly here in this discussion around exercise, we can continue to grow and improve and add upon those improvements. There are several research studies that show that for up to a decade, which is just the longest that we've studied it for, not that there's a stop there, but for up to a decade, there is continued compound improvement in these abilities that we can have from a cellular level as a result of the benefits of continued exercise. Now, beyond the established topic of exercise and many of the others we talked about 2 slides ago, there are also emerging interventions that are being evaluated now. None are yet across the finish line, but there's lots of active and interesting research that's currently ongoing to look at, could there be senolytic drugs that remove senescent cells? Might we be able to reprogram these epigenetic switchboards to better resemble the positioning that they were in our younger years? Might we be able to better modulate the gut microbiome to look more similar to the microbiome in our younger years and therefore enhance the net effects and the downstream effects that are had by the microbiome on our health as a whole? Continually paying attention to our immune aging to ask how might we be able to continue to boost that resilience, and then also gain greater insights into biomarker analysis. Just as the team over at Google DeepMind had done great work with AlphaFold to figure out the folding patterns of many, 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 many proteins that had, slowed biologists down for decades and that already had spent many billions of dollars on the topic. With AI, they were able to solve that question very quickly. The topic of using AI to identify patterns in biomarker analysis that exceed the complexity of the usual physician to be able to analyze, thinking about looking at patterns of hundreds or hundreds of thousands of biomarkers to better triangulate certain biological processes. And as we continue to move along, the broader topic is thinking as we think about targeting aging, not just disease, it will require there to be a shift in how we think about medicine as a whole. So traditional medicine, it's established for treating one disease at a time. The usual perspective is if I don't have anything bothering me, I'm probably not going to be going into the doctor. It's the classic reason why so many otherwise healthy human beings in their middle years of life can unintentionally, based on the way the system has been created, find themselves not sitting down in front of a doctor for 15 or sometimes 20 plus years between their really college years and then their mid to late 40s. It's because the traditional system that has been built is reactive. If nothing is bothering you, if nothing is out of array in an overt symptomatic side, the usual system does not have much engagement. But as we think about a shift, as we think about the topic of health span focused medicine, this is now shifting towards the proactive approach, saying, even though I may be 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 90 years old, regardless of the number of acute medical problems or chronic medical problems that I have, the process of aging is underway. Focusing in on and building out patterns in slowing this process of biological aging are vital things to be talking about at each phase of life, very akin to the topic of saving for retirement, while aging is something that is in the human being's future, sometimes the distance from that topic, and each human being will place in their head a specific number at times when they say aging or being old. There'll be a certain number that pops up in someone's mind when thinking about that topic. But the reality is, this is a continuum. We are all aging, regardless of where we are at. The aging process itself typically brings positive elements for us from about 5 years old up through 25 years old, but from 25 years old onward, the total number of positives that aging process gives is less. So thinking about approach aging proactively and with a level of focus, knowing that this will be the highly important long-term objective to be performing well on. And in doing this, we'll be also therefore reducing the resultant number of diseases that are being experienced, from cancer to cardiovascular disease, dementia to metabolic disorders. And this core concept, while very easy to describe, is one that I anticipate the broader medical system as a whole that is represented in the United States to struggle greatly with. And I fully anticipate it being several decades until a true focus towards a more health span focused medicine is able to be created in the usual system due to just the slow moving nature of the current system, its incentives, its reimbursement structures, and the way that the organizations that exist around the country and in this medical style have been created. So in this future of medicine, the goal is let's predict, let's find things early, let's be able to monitor, track these biomarkers, and as a result, be able to be proactively engaging to be able to act early before disease develops, and then tailor health span focused strategies to really target the aging process itself to extend the number of healthy years that we can have. The true goal is to extend these healthy years as far out as absolutely possible, ideally all the way up until the final decade of our life, to be able to be, as it is described in centenarians, to be an escaper. Those that lived to 100 years plus and had zero detectable disease prior to the age of 80 years old. Um, the goal and the approach is through one of sustained consistency to get here. Um, as we continue to evolve this process, um, there's great benefits that can stand to be seen. So, as I move along, this is an enormous topic. I wanted to end with 12 kind of pithy phrases, some 12 key takeaways to leave you all with. So thinking first and foremost, the topic of exercise, move it or lose it. Continue to prioritize aerobic exercise. Aerobic physical activity is the most potent anti-aging intervention. It's related to reduced incidence of age-related diseases, reduced vascular biological age, extended lifespan. Huge data sets show that exercise and total volume leisure time physical activity independently slows biological aging regardless of other factors. Second up, rust never sleeps, but you should. Both short and long sleep durations actually accelerate the biological aging process in a U-shaped relationship, with the nadir, the dip, right around 7 hours a day. There's been deeper studies using Mendelian randomization that confirm that short sleep causally shortens lifespan. So the old phrase, I'll sleep when I'm dead, has been, now completely disproven to be entirely wrong, such that the old phrase, I'll sleep when I'm dead, should actually have been, I won't sleep, so it'll be sooner that I'm dead. Focusing in on good, consistent sleep is highly important. And epidemiological data in millions of participants consistently shows that 7 hours of sleep is that sweet spot that we should be consistently aiming for. Next up, eat like a Greek, age like a myth. Think about the topic of adopting a Mediterranean style diet. The Mediterranean style diet is the most consistently associated dietary pattern with slower biological aging, reduced cardiovascular disease, and better longevity. This diet is marked by high intake of vegetables, fruits, olive oils, nuts, legumes, lean protein such as fish. It improves endothelial function, reduces the stiffness of our blood vessels, lowers inflammation. Other similar diets, like the Okinawan diet, those in Okinawa, Japan, they all positively moderate this nutrient sensing pathway within the body, that's central to the topic of aging, with the common theme in this. If we are eating whole, minimally processed foods, our body's own internal nutrient sensing capacities are more precisely calibrated to estimate out the caloric load that we're receiving versus the more processed that a food becomes, that nutrient sensing system is not able to reliably estimate how many calories we're consuming. So as a result, with the human being calibrated over thousands of years in resource scarce environments to avoid starvation, if our body can't figure out how many calories we're eating in a double cheeseburger, the body will simply say, I don't know what this is, but let's eat as much as we physically can hold until we run out of space. That's the reason why it is so much easier to, overeat on a processed item of food compared to the more natural version of that would exist out in the world. Next up, less on the plate, more on the clock. Um, Caloric moderation is the best documented strategy to prolong lifespan across the entire human species. Thinking about this Goldilocks phenomenon, not too little, not too much. The biggest core component is that the key is to avoid excess, not to pursue starvation, but avoid excess. Human beings have historically existed in domains of caloric scarcity. Now we exist in a domain of caloric abundance, and we're wildly unprepared for this phase of abundance. So, again, to anchor in on less on the plate, more on the clock, the more whole foods that we are eating, the easier it is to appropriately fuel ourselves from a caloric perspective, and therefore hit those caloric responsible targets while also still feeling full, content, and satiated. Next up, lift heavy things, lighten your mortality. Want to continue to focus on building and maintain muscle strength. Low muscle strength independently predicts all-cause mortality regardless of muscle mass, metabolic syndrome, or physical activity levels. Older adults that meet strength training guidelines have 46% lower odds of all-cause mortality. Um, so just is such a vital element to lean into. And just as the study had showed, it's the consistency that is most important. It's less about saying, I arrived at 70 years old, hyper fit, and then I stopped being active. I stopped pursuing strength training. No, the goal is to build and then continue so that you can be able to maintain those abilities. Next up, don't go it alone. Loneliness kills. We need to cultivate social connection. Persistent loneliness carries a 57% increased hazard of mortality, and social isolation brings a 28% increase. Both are also associated with accelerated biological aging. Um, a meta-analysis of 23 different meta-analysis looking at over 1.4 billion study participants confirmed a very robust link between social support and reduced disease and mortality. Also, social connection downregulates our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis that then positively impacts our autonomic nervous system and our inflammatory cascades. The last six, find your why before you die. As we think about nurturing purpose in life, greater purpose in life in several large studies done with over 100,000 people is associated with more than a 17% lower risk of both cardiovascular events and all-cause mortality. And purpose in life explains an estimated 88% of all loneliness mortality association, making it a really critical mediator for longevity. Also, those that have purpose have lower CRP levels, lower fibrinogen levels, and higher HDL good cholesterol levels. Then they also tend to live healthier lifestyles and see other positive changes in their health happen over time. Next, stress less, age less. Um, we want to manage our chronic psychological stress. Chronic perceived stress accelerates biological aging at a rate comparable to smoking, an estimated 2.4 additional months of aging per year in those that perceived chronic high stress. So this is why it's so very important to pursue modalities to metabolize away that chronic stress, whether through mindfulness, cognitive behavioral strategies, other stress reduction practices. And these are not luxuries. They are geroscience interventions to slow the aging process itself. Next, where there's smoke, there's aging. Smoking avoidance is the single most impactful toxin-mediated elimination strategy. All lifestyle profiles associated with the longest lived show lack of smoking. This is the simple one. Keep it as close to zero, if not 100% zero for a lifetime as possible. Next, keep your waist, lose your years, maintain a healthy body composition. Largest studies are done looking at body mass index because not all clinics across the United States have access to DEXA scanners, but most specifically, body mass index is created as a surrogate to be able to guesstimate what someone's amount of visceral adipose tissue would be in their body, with the goal of keeping that in an optimal range. Um, this visceral adipose tissue, this deep fat lining our internal organs, directly promotes cellular aging and mediates inflammation, accelerating nearly every hallmark of aging. By being able to keep the appropriate amount of visceral fat rather than having an excess, um, we slow the aging process itself, we improve our blood sugar control, and we also limit our risk of frailty. Next, an ounce of prevention is worth a decade of function. As we think about the topic of geroscience that's continually trying to study interventions targeting the biology of aging, whether there's studies looking at caloric restriction, other medications like metformin, rapamycin, or other rapalogs, other senolytic drugs that may slow the development of multiple age-related diseases simultaneously rather than all at one time, this research has still not yet been conclusively completed. Right now, proactive screening, proactive observation of health remains the bedrock of compressing morbidity. The goal is not just to, again, not just to add years to life, but add and maximize the life in those years. Next, the thought process, your brain is a muscle, use it or lose it too. We want to preserve our cognitive function as both short sleep and the cognitive burden or cumulative burden of beta amyloid plaques are linked to cognitive decline, with 7 to 8 hours of sleep associated with the lowest burden. Lifelong learning, also cognitive engagement, treatment of mood-related disorders, and social connection is also, as mentioned in some of the other topics, an incredibly positive benefit as well. So, as we think about the topic of aging as a whole, there are many exciting elements of research that are ongoing that may identify specific pharmacologic interventions. As of right now, as we really anchor in on not just living longer, but living better, the goal is really double down on these lifestyle-based behaviors that can slow the aging process itself. And if we can slow this aging process even slightly, we will then also be likely to be delaying the onset of other diseases as well. As I often say, the goal of our team at Shift as your physician and care team is to do our hard work today so that you stay as boring as possible to all the other physicians in your life based on the hard work you're doing now, limiting and improving and even curing many of the disease or risk for disease factors that you had initially arrived with. So it's been my joy to be able to chat with you all about this topic. It is an enormous topic that I had to make some artistic liberties in picking and choosing what I would discuss with you all today. But now I certainly open up for any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Hollett, for that informative presentation. As you said, we're now going to move into the Q&A portion of our health hour. So to all of our participants, if you have a question, you can submit it anonymously using the Q&A feature at any time. And we've already received some great questions, and so let's start with our first one. What are some ways that you can improve HRV and VO2?
So heart rate variability, measuring that interbeat variability within the heart, um, is a metric that is tracked by many in hopes of giving insight into the overall level of health that someone has as an individual. The two top drivers for heart rate variability are going to be consistency of good, high quality sleep, again, targeting that 7 to 8 hours range, and then also consistency of exercise with a specific attention to being sure that at least once a week someone is doing higher intensity exercise to make sure they're really getting the heart rate up, whether that is in some form of interval training or other strenuous work. Next, as we think about VO2 max, um, improving VO2 max is a concept where we need total volume of exercise and have that total volume of exercise be received by the body in such a way that the body is not breaking down. So typically that would represent itself as at least several days of the week being cardiovascularly active. If someone were going to pick 3 days, it'd probably be 2 of those days with a moderate level of exertion, and then one of those days being higher. The reason why, while more calorically efficient, why high intensity interval training is not recommended as an every single day of the week activity is that injury risks do notably increase with sustained and repeated high intensity interval training. So it creates this high reward, but also higher risk side of things. So knowing that the strategic goal of improving your VO2 max, improving your body's ability to take in oxygen from the world and convert that into usable energy by the cells of our body, consistency is the biggest thing because even in 2 weeks of injury, the body decelerates, the body decompensates so notably that maintaining consistency is the top level goal. I would much rather somebody have a slightly less aggressive cardiovascular training plan that then results in zero injuries in a year, rather than somebody having a more aggressive plan that results in a hip flexor strain, a hamstring tweak, a foot problem that then throughout the course of the year takes a full month and a half collectively away from their entire year of being able to be active in training.
Great explanation. Thank you. We do have another question from our participant who says that they have already aged, and so they are interested in how your recommendations can help improve their health span going forward.
Oh, absolutely. So the good news is these biological aging processes can be slowed and also in many cases reversed. So it's never too late to begin paying attention to these elements. Um, it's like the phrase that I heard from a financial advisor many years ago around the topic. Again, a parallel I've shared a few times. The concept of sharing saving for retirement. The best time to start saving for retirement is many, many years ago. The second best time is today. Certainly, the only guaranteed wrong answer for someone who sees themselves in the aging process is to give up. The key is we want to build sustainable habit patterns through our whole team here at Shift so that someone can feel that they are retaking tactical control of their health and they're able to both feel those improvements and also see the measurables, creating real tactical, measurable improvements in their health.
Great. We have another question here from the audience. Do you believe that fasting is beneficial? And if so, what kind of fasting do you think is beneficial? Something like intermittent fasting, or even 24-hour fasting, or a one meal a day regime?
Yes. So, one of the biggest complexities as we get into the discussion and in around the research of fasting is that unintentionally, most of the intermittent fasting studies end up creating a caloric deficit in the treatment arm relative to the placebo arm. As we look at the literature more thoroughly, it is that caloric deficit that ends up being the difference maker. And if you microanalyze it, it's less that they're at an extreme deficit and more that they have a consistent and ideal level of fueling all the way back to the common theme. The average first world human being eats more calories today than their body would natively choose to consume, and it becomes a chronic overconsumption. So when we think about time restricted eating, it is the attempt to control the when that we eat so that the how much we eat is better modulated. Um, the biggest call out as we think about time restricted eating is every dietary approach, whether it's us controlling when we eat with the time restrictive eating, how much we eat, whether that would be with a counting calories or a volumetric based approach, or even what that we eat, avoiding specific food groups or having a focus on others. Um, each of those approaches can be effective, but all of them have trade-offs. So there's no such thing as one perfect diet. The most common things being common, that I try to take a dietary approach that is steeped in both medical literature and human experience. The common theme of maintaining an eating window that only comprises about 12 hours of the day ends up proving to be metabolically very beneficial. Human beings have not progressed through thousands of years accustomed to consuming food during all of our waking hours. A very sensible approach would be that someone is eating food during essentially a 12-hour window. If they were going to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning and having breakfast at 6:30 or 7, having their feeding window being somewhere between 6:30 or 7 in the morning and approximately 6:30 or 7 at night, with the common theme saying minimize or eliminate entirely after dinner snacking. And then this essentially what results, 10 to 12 hour fasting window ends up being metabolically very beneficial for the body. So certainly you can expand those fasting windows, but the common theme as we think about sustained lifelong dietary patterns is consistency. And the number one thing that becomes very difficult as more aggressive fasting windows are improved is that it's hard to keep this going. Because the simple answer is the dietary pattern we follow, we should be confident that we can follow it for the next many decades. Following an approach for a year or two, even if it was very effective, if that is not continually followed, the benefits then evaporate. So it's building a sustainable approach. So really, that's one of the core focuses of our team at Shift is building out a sustainable approach. This is not saying what is the most any human being could ever do to improve their health. We might have that as a awareness item, but asking in a real practical sense, what can I, as a living, breathing human being that has needs and responsibilities and requirements placed on me, how can I build out a plan that moves me onwards and upwards in a continually positive way that I can sustain for years on end? And then as a result, see my health continue to improve as well.
Great. Our next question is, do you often prescribe statins to women, even in the face of very little to no trials done on women?
Yeah, so um, very good question overall. I think the question was likely based on the initial meta-analysis that was done on statins in women. Was too small of a study. So essentially, it was underpowered to be able to see the differences in cardiovascular prevention in men versus women. So was not able to prove that there was that benefit in cholesterol reduction from women. There was a landmark trial, the CTT, Cholesterol Treatment Trialists Collaboration. It's a meta-analysis from 2015 that used data from 27 different randomized controlled trials, had almost 200,000 participants that resolved much of this uncertainty that more or less showed that in women, the risk reduction as we use statins for cholesterol reduction parallels that of men. So there is not a immediate necessity for a different approach. But the high level, as we think about cholesterol, the the real answer is that it's complex. As we think about receiving a new member at Shift, it's very often based on specific physical metrics that we may be recommending an advanced lipid panel to be checked for individuals. This looks much more deeply than just the total cholesterol, HDL, LDL cholesterol, and triglycerides, looking all the way down to the particle level of these cholesterol particles to quantify out what's the total number of particles that I have rather than just the total amount of mass, knowing that those small, dense LDL particles bring more risk. Looking for things like lipoprotein A or LP little a, which is its own independent cardiovascular risk modifier. Also looking at what's the pattern of inflammatory markers that I'm seeing in the body? What's my insulin sensitivity like? And very interestingly, looking at in the balance in our bloodstream of cholesterol, being able to answer the question of what is the origin of that cholesterol. Certainly, our liver can be hyperproducing cholesterol, and that's one of the steps that statins and bempedoic acid and PCSK9 inhibitors inhibit. Um, it can also be that our intestines are just very efficient at absorbing cholesterol from the food that we eat. If that is the case, if someone is a hyperabsorber, they may see far greater improvements in their cholesterol with a different medication like Zetia or ezetimibe is the chemical name for it. So the common theme as we think about delivering care for living, breathing, vibrant human beings at Shift is that one size fits one rather than generic approaches Our approach is to methodically get to know the person who is being cared for by us. And while certainly we use um, rules and guidelines and insights in our favor, there are no blind knee-jerk decisions made. It is the roll up the sleeves, get down into the details to figure out not just what's a generic right answer, but what is the answer based on the detailed data for each individual. And that's really then the joy of our team to be able to focus on each individual, not feel as though we're flying through a high level of volume of members to care for, but saying, no, we're anchoring in on quality. We want to deliver you the highest level of medical quality, of health building quality that could be had anywhere on earth at this time.
Thank you. Before we wrap up, we do have time for one final question. Are there any health systems currently implementing Healthspan focused medicine? And in your opinion, will private practices and research laboratories serve as a primary catalyst for this industry shift? Or will they be responsible for establishing the foundational work and initial outcomes associated with this approach to care?
Absolutely. Um, as a whole, no, there are not huge health systems comprehensively yet leaning into this approach. And the really complex answer is that for myself, having had discussions with even people at the American Hospital Association, which represents all of the academic hospitals throughout the country, um, it's a complex conundrum. The science of this proactive approach towards healthcare, health plans focused medicine is the science is very strong. Um, None of the experts in the room are questioning the utility, the validity, the efficacy of this approach. It is strong, it is effective. Unfortunately, the business model of medicine right now centers around sick care. And particularly, it centers around what I will, overly label as large interventions, surgeries and ICU stays and complex instrumentation. It gives a notable lift to hospitals. The margins of hospitals is razor thin. They exist upon the need for interventions. The true complex fear of major academic hospital systems, if we were to actually lean fully into this prevention focused care that has fewer heart attacks, fewer strokes, fewer cancers, less diabetes, and on and on and on. Their fear is that they would be left with an aging cohort that didn't need large heroic interventions, then not infuse the hospitals with the revenues to even keep the doors open to provide the less heroic, simple, small things. And that, yes, someone might live to be, 99 years old, and for a period of time, they need a small blood pressure medicine or they need a little bit of a cholesterol medicine. That does not bring any substantial amount of revenue into the hospital. But if someone ends up with a heart attack, you could be spending multiples of millions of dollars in just a couple of days. So the simple answer is the compensation revenue reimbursement model inside of healthcare, however you'd like to label it, in the way that the current insurance pay or payee model is set up, is highly dysfunctional and is actually at odds with this preventative approach. So we are seeing some more inventive models that are gradually coming around, but I think it is going to be quite a while until this model is adopted by the big academic medical centers. So it's going to be largely up to smaller private practices that are able to free themselves from the broken system that is the insurance-based payer model to be able to say, rather than focus on what medical insurance will pay for, we want to focus on what does the human being in front of me need to live the longest, fullest, richest, most capable life. In a way, it places us similar to that, financial advisor that says they're a fiduciary advisor on behalf of their client, really places us into that perspective of saying, our goal is to help you to be at your best. It's not to figure out how to code something a specific way so that it optimizes reimbursement. It's truly to focus on the individual and to be able to answer the questions today that the usual system is not going to be asking for about 15 years, because that's the other annoyance that change as a whole. Healthcare is very, very slow to engage. The average delay from data being completed in a study until rollout of some new technology innovation and innovation in healthcare is an average of about 17 years, which is about half of a physician's career of practice. So the simple answer, modern medicine is like a huge aircraft carrier that is very slow to readjust its positioning. Smaller practices such as Shift are able to be much more nimble and to be able to adjust themselves accordingly rather than being encumbered by some of these historical elements within medicine that bring an extreme amount of complexity and are very slow to change due to the sick care oriented model that the insurance industry unfortunately follows.
That is very insightful. Thank you, Dr. Hollett, for sharing your expertise with us today, and thank you to everyone who joined the session. If you'd like to revisit anything from today's discussion, keep an eye out for an email as we will be sending out the recording. Thank you again for being here, and we hope you'll join us for Shift's next health hour.
Many thanks.